What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to basketball. And more importantly, welcome back to our season preview series. This is the series where we're going to break down every single NBA team before the start of the regular season. We're going to go into things like their goals, what their off-season looked like, potential rotations and depth chart, their financial situation, what kind of draft assets do they have, everything that you need to know about every single team before the start of the season. This episode, we have my favorite team, the Chicago Bulls. But hey, before we get into it, make sure you guys like, subscribe, and comment. I've responded to every single comment on my YouTube channel up to this point, and I intend to keep on doing so. All right, let's get into it. And boom, just like that, we're back to our season preview spreadsheet. For those of you that don't know, I build these spreadsheets to kind of help tell the story a little bit more about each and every team. It helps me articulate everything. If you guys want access to these spreadsheets that I build, it's a pretty simple way to get it. Just leave me a comment below saying you would like access to the spreadsheet. I will then give you a link to join the Discord. Shoot me a DM when you hop on the Discord, and I'll give you access to the sheet. It's a cool way for you guys to like interact with me, get something cool out of it, and then it helps my algorithm, so everybody wins at the end of the day. But anyway, we got the Chicago Bulls. This is a tough one for me because you guys know, if you've been watching the channel for any amount of time, I'm originally from Chicago. I now live in Minneapolis, but I'm a diehard Bulls fan at the end of the day, and it is really, really hard to talk about the Chicago Bulls. So I'm going to try to make sure that this is still like informative, and it's still like I'm trying to take emotion out of it, but I'm still going to talk about some emotional things just because I am a Bulls fan, and I think you guys can all connect this to your sports teams in some capacity. I am a person at the end of the day, but we're going to try to keep this factual, analytical to some extent, and just kind of go from there. But the Chicago Bulls had probably one of the grossest seasons you can have as a sports fan, where you're damn near 500 but just below. We found ourselves in the play-in games again, where we again got bounced by the Miami Heat just before cracking the playoffs, so that sucks. As far as like the franchise status and everything going forward, we have a couple different levels for teams if you're not familiar. By the way, if you guys haven't watched the previous videos in the series, like go back, watch all of them. I think they're entertaining, and it's a good way to start your day. We got selling, rebuilding, growing, contending. We are not any of these. We are selling right now in this team. There are still too many things going on in this team that are not conducive to anything positive. So we got to tear this team down, and that is the first goal that we have here. Blow this thing up. Please find a way to blow this thing up. I know it's not easy, but we've been telling this team to do it for how long now, and it's hard to watch, right? Like, because there's good players on this team that could go somewhere else and be productive. The Bulls just decide to hold on to them, and now it's like too hard to move them. It's a whole thing. Along with blowing things up, we want to acquire draft capital. Something, right? Some sort of asset. A young player, draft capital is probably the best thing because then you can pick your own players. I think that's probably a better way to go. And then let's try to grow any of these couple players. Josh Giddey, Patrick Williams, Dalen Terry, Kobe White. Those are, you could probably throw Ayo Dosunmu in there as well. Like, you've got a couple of these young dudes that are like interesting. I don't know if any of these guys are franchise altering guys, and that's kind of the shitty thing that we got to talk about today, but there's some talent in there nonetheless. And so please, let's find a way to start developing these guys. But anyway, let's start talking about their offseason, because it was an interesting one to say the least. So a lot of familiar faces you're going to see on this screen. And again, for those of you not familiar, we have a drafted players section. We have a player departure section, which are players that were on the team last season that are no longer on the team. And then players brought in, players that weren't on the team last season that are now on the team. Let's start off with the draft. The Bulls took Matas Buzelis, a Chicago local. For those of you that were following my draft preview series and just talking about mock drafts and like my big boards and all that, I wasn't very high on Buzelis, so I can't say I was necessarily surprised when he got picked by the Bulls. I think for the spot that he fell to, I think it was probably a worthwhile pick. I just don't know who else they would have picked in that. So while I wasn't too high on the prospect himself, I think it made sense for them to pick him. And by the way, I was involved in the draft process this year, which was a really, really cool thing. And so getting to be a part of it and kind of like see him work out himself is a cool thing. But I do have some concerns about Buzelis. There are some good things as well. Some of the things like his defensive instincts like aren't horrible. I think there's something to kind of build off there. Obviously, he's a nice athlete. We're hoping that he's going to be able to put a shot together. It doesn't look bad by any means. It just doesn't fall right now. And at the end of the day, if the ball doesn't go in the hoop, the ball doesn't go in the hoop. So something's got to change. I'm worried about the handle a little bit because like his whole upside is that he's a lengthy guy that can hopefully be a little bit more dynamic. And right now he can't shoot or dribble really. So you've got got an athletic power forward. And that's kind of what you got right now. And so there's a lot of time to grow. There's going to be opportunity for him to get on the court and everything early on in his career. And that's awesome. There's some guys that take the pressure off him early. So he does have an avenue for success. It's just, that's what it is. And that's all the Bulls did in the draft as far as this season. Now we go into player departures because, oh my gosh, did they lose some heart and they lost some soul this offseason. First one being DeMar DeRozan. While DeMar's time in Chicago wasn't long, I have to say, it was a real pleasure having him on the Bulls just because, he was such a class act. He was very involved in the community, just kept it real and hustled, I felt like, the entire time. Maybe not as much on defense always, but, I just always felt like he was in it every game, and so I really appreciated that, and watching him hit so many game winners is certainly a cool thing. I think it was time for them to move him. They didn't really get a ton for him, unfortunately, and that sucks, but there was just no reason to keep him up at this point, right? There just really wasn't, and so we were either going to lose him for nothing or just get a little bit for him, and so we got a little bit for him, and that's what we got. Next thing, Alex Caruso. We all know the impact that Alex Caruso has on basketball games. It's just not something that necessarily appears in the box score. His three-point shot started to come around a little bit more as of late, which is a nice thing, but man, his defense and his effort and just what he can do to inspire a team, it's you can't calculate how much it helps a team. There's just not a statistic for it. We really should have it. I'm sure there's statistics that people try to use, but nothing completely encapsulates it, at least that I know of. So Alex Caruso is on his way to OKC. They obviously got a very interesting young player in return that we'll talk about, but Caruso being gone, it sucks. Yes, you did have to do it, and I know a lot of people scrutinized the Bulls a little bit because they should have gotten a draft pick out of it, but I don't think that way at all, because here's the thing. You take a draft pick, or you hope that a draft pick turns into a promising young player with potential. We got one in the trade, and we're talking about Josh Giddey, right? So you got the young player already, and you already know that he's pretty solid. So I don't know. I would much rather have this than a draft pick, in my opinion, at least. So I think they actually did pretty well in this Caruso trade, and as a Bulls fan, I was personally pretty excited about it, but it does suck to see Caruso go. It's just such a wasted effort in his time in Chicago. I feel bad for him. Big Dre, Andre Drummond, probably the best backup center in basketball, you'd have to say. Obviously, the rebounding is what he's really known for, being able to put the ball in around the hoop, run, jump, dunk type things. Run maybe isn't the best way to describe him always, but he's a physical presence that makes an impact every single time he's on the court. He's almost always a positive in that sense, and he seems to be a much more motivated player than he was when he was younger. So he's off to Philly now. The Bulls weren't able to retain him. They really should have traded him because they could have got something in this last season, but he's gone now. And then Javonte Green, who I'm not going to lie, was my favorite player on the Bulls, is now a Pelican. Pelicans fans, you guys are going to love this guy so much. In the great words of Stacey King, there's five Javontes out there at all times. There just always is. He is everywhere on the court. He's a little Energizer bunny. I think he looks like the baby, but taller, and you guys let me know if I'm crazy for thinking that, but he's basically just running and trying to dunk on everybody at all times, and he plays lockdown defense, and he can guard centers if you really need to. I just love Javonte Green. His three-point shot's not bad either. So I don't know. I really love Javonte Green. But anyway, who did they bring in? Let's start from the back. Let's just get these out of the way. Chris Duarte, he was part of the DeMar DeRozan trade. He showed a little bit in the first half of his rookie year. He's been pretty rough since then because he's not that athletic, and he's supposed to be a shooter, and he can't shoot right now. Given he hasn't been given a great opportunity, he hasn't been on the court much. I don't think he's going to be on the court much now either. So I think it's just kind of a placeholder guy for us for now. Maybe he shows up in training camp and he's just lights out and he can shoot a little bit. Good. This team could use some shooters. So I don't know, maybe cracks the rotation, but I don't understand his positioning. He's too small in a lot of aspects. I'm not that big on Chris Duarte. I hope he finds some success. Jalen Smith, actually a pretty solid pickup. The Bulls needed a little bit of height. They went and got him out from Indiana. Jalen Smith, I feel like has been underappreciated everywhere that he goes. I feel like I have these glasses too that he's wearing. That's just such a side note, but I think Jalen Smith's a really interesting player for the sense that he can space the floor a little bit. He is a decent athlete. He can bang with the biggest of guys and everything. So he's got a lot of solid qualities about him and makes an interesting backup center. I don't think he's going to develop into a starting center necessarily, but he's an interesting young player to kind of keep around and see what you can do with him. So I think it's worth the flyer at the very least. And then we got Josh Giddey. So obviously Josh Giddey was in the news for a lot of reasons last year, and it's kind of unfortunate considering everything that we know about it now, like kind of how much he gets dragged in the mud now. It's an unfortunate set of circumstances that I won't comment on any more than that. I probably know maybe more than the average person should with that, but it seems like an unfortunate set of circumstances. But Josh Giddey's a really good basketball player. Let's just get that out of the way right now. I know people like to talk about like, not a great shooter or whatever, and they don't think he's very good on defense. And I'm going to encourage all of you right now, because I'm going to say in this video, and I know there's going to be 2 or 3 comments about it, like, Josh Giddey's not a good defender. I've seen him not be able to stand in front of people. All right, there's 2 things we're going to, let's talk about those right now. Josh Giddey's a really good defensive basketball player. Is he the best at keeping somebody in front of him? Not necessarily. There's multiple things to think about with that, though. Is he the most like laterally quick player? No, so that is just a struggle for him in general. But the Thunder also play this type of defense where they're trying to guide you to a particular point on the court because they wanted to lead you into Chet Holmgren. And so there are times where he's supposed to jump out in a particular direction, say like a shift like this, so that he can direct guys a certain way or just guess their jab correctly. So you guys got to chill a little bit. There's a bit more to basketball than you think. Josh Giddey has one of the highest like defensive ratings in basketball, and if you don't understand how defensive rating works, look it up. It's really complicated. It's not just plus minus. It's not a team statistic. Individual defensive rating is a really complicated thing that's pretty well thought out, and usually you find the best defensive players at the top of the list. But anyway, Josh Giddey's really good at ending possessions, whether it's like getting rebounds or being in the right way to tip a pass or just be in the right way to make somebody make the next pass. Really smart team defensive basketball player. But I think more than anything, I'm excited to see him in a role where he is actually just the primary point guard. Obviously, the Bulls are going to let him do that. They wouldn't have traded a guy like Caruso if they didn't plan on doing that. Josh Giddey has elite passing skills. He really can manage a basketball team. We hope that he's going to be able to develop the jumper a little bit more. He's pretty good about getting to the middle of the court and working from there, which is nice, and that's where a lot of his scoring comes from. A good amount of his scoring also just comes from being smart without the basketball at times. Oh, what the heck? Who's talking to me? Turn off phone. But anyway, he was kind of having to do a lot of that because in OKC they had so many other guys that had the ball, and they kind of did that driving cut system, which I'm curious if they'll kind of wean that out in OKC now that they don't have like 2 point guards out there at the same time. But nonetheless, Josh Giddey's a really, really interesting young basketball player that I think could probably put up 18 and 9 if you really asked him to, and that's a pretty elite point guard to have out there. So I'm really, really excited to see what he can do this year. But anyway, let's go into the roster breakdown. Alrighty, so here we are in the roster breakdown. Those of you that know this or it looks familiar, it is from our Ideal Offseason series. I felt it was a good way to kind of show what the team's status is right now. So we're going to look at things like salary cap space, draft assets, depth chart, and then just talk about the current roster in general. But the first thing I want to do is talk about the actual draft picks that they have. I think that's just a good touch base to kind of be like, okay, what kind of assets are we working with? We talked about one of the goals is acquiring more of them. And you can see on here, there's just a lot of Bulls on here. Next year, they have no first round pick. Technically, there are protections and stuff like that. I don't list the picks that have technically been traded on here, but we do most likely get our pick back next year if we're bad. I think it's like 1 through 10 protected, or maybe it's just lottery protected. I don't remember. I think Portland has it. Is it Portland? I don't remember exactly who has it, but if the Trailblazers are somehow decent, the Bulls will get that. Otherwise, it's just a lot of Bulls picks, like a little straggling Kings pick right here, but otherwise not anything all that interesting. So if you want to actually rebuild a team, you're going to have to start acquiring some more assets because you're not going to hit on every single pick. So we got to find a way to bulk it up. Luckily, they do have like all of their firsts going forward. So that's at least a good starting point. You're not starting at a deficit, but we got to turn some of these players on this team into some actual future assets that could potentially help build something here. Let's talk about the salary cap space itself. So there's kind of 4 levels to the cap space. If you guys have been watching these videos, you already kind of know how this works. But in essence, there's 4 levels: the cap space line, a luxury tax line, a first apron line, and a second apron line. If you guys want more in-depth breakdowns about these, watch like the first video or 2 in this series, the Celtics and Grizzlies ones. I go into much more detail here. But all you really need to know right now is the first and second aprons really scare teams because they cost a lot of money and they lock you into the team you have. The NBA does not want teams to be trading their players anymore, right? Like not completely, but they don't want stars being traded all the time. It's not good for viewership ratings and things like that. Players are kind of what drive this league, and they need teams to be something that people are invested in. So this is how they're keeping players where they are. I personally like it. I think it's a really cool thing. I want to be attached to players and teams like I used to when I was a kid. So that's just me, though. You let me know your opinion. So it's really good that the Bulls are in the position that they're in. They're not even in the luxury tax right now. They're using up their cap space, but this team is going to be cheap overall. They don't have to pay much money, and the Bulls owner loves that because he hates paying for anything, despite the Bulls like selling out like every single game like most seasons. So you know what, whatever, be cheap. He owns the White Sox or whatever too, and so if you watch baseball at all, that team's a damn joke as well. But sorry, I told you some emotions were going to come out in this. Talking about it though, they haven't even hit luxury tax yet, which is good. You're probably going to hope to cut down the amount of money you're paying this team even more. Is probably the hope, because you're trying to unload some of these guys. But for the time being, they're in good standing. They don't really have any restrictions as to what they can and can't do via trades or the free agent market or buyouts or things like that. Are they going to be participating in some of those things? Probably not, because they're probably not going to be that good. But nonetheless, they're in a good situation there. All right, let's talk about the roster itself. So the most interesting player on the team right now, Zach LaVine, right? So Zach LaVine is a good basketball player. I think we all kind of like to ride on Zach LaVine a little bit right now, just because of like his contract and like, oh, it's a horrible contract. And like, yeah, it's a scary contract is how I'd put it. I don't think it's horrible. I just think it's scary for teams, and you're rightfully scared of it. This is a guy that gets injured a lot and has not won many basketball games. But what do we know about Zach LaVine is there's not many players I can name that are better offensive players than Zach LaVine. This dude can get a bucket whenever he needs to. Hopefully he's okay past this injury and everything, because his athleticism is what makes him such a deadly offensive player. Like his ability to like blow by people and be so explosive. I know he does all that sand training. He has like a sand basketball court at his house. Really interesting concept that I've actually used in practice before as well. But yeah, no, Zach LaVine, great offensive basketball player. He can definitely help a team win. It's just he's kind of been in crappy situations up to this point. Lonzo Ball, 1 year left on his contract. What started out as such a great addition to this Bulls team has just not worked out because of multiple injuries, but he is back this year. I don't know how big of a role he's going to have. I find it hard to believe he's going to play a lot of minutes, but Lonzo Ball's still on the team. I'd have to imagine he's just going to ride this contract out, and we'll see how he plays this year. Nikola Vucevic. This is another tough one, because like Zach LaVine, you need to trade both of these guys somehow. I think there's a better chance of LaVine, honestly, but man, it's hard because these aren't 1 year things, right? You would imagine that they would try to take a page out of like what the Nets did and what a lot of people did, or what a lot of people do nowadays, where they're like, okay, we're a bad team. We need more assets. How are we going to do this? We should buy bad contracts somehow because we have the cap space to do so. But now you can't necessarily do that because you do have some expensive players on the team, and those teams probably don't want these guys back. So you have to find contending teams that can afford these guys and somehow make it work with the apron rules in place. It's incredibly difficult to do that now. So there's a possibility that like Zach LaVine and Vucevic are still on the roster by the end of the season, and now all of a sudden you're like more of a mid-level team again, because these guys are going to help you win basketball games, just not enough of them to make it like worth it. So it's such a crappy situation to be in. So that's that. Then we got Patrick Williams, a guy that, man, I've got a guy that I know within their organization. Actually, he was in their organization. He's not anymore, and has personally worked with Pat. And he's like, this guy's so talented, so stupidly talented. I think we all see that. Like, he has so much skill to his game. It just doesn't come out. There's like that level of like aggressiveness and killer mentality isn't there. And that's upsetting. So can we find a way to get some of these guys like the Levines and the Vuceviches out of the way so that he can become more of an option, and he's forced to be more of an option? Because otherwise you've got a good defensive player that can sometimes space the floor, that sometimes can create, but you can tell they have to force him to like really be a scorer at times. So kind of an interesting situation there. Kobe White, who's surprised me, honestly. I wasn't a big fan of Kobe White when they drafted him. I was like, okay, I see this guy, and I still kind of see him this way as like more of a six-man spark plug type of guy, like a Jordan Clarkson type. I think is a good comparison for him. I don't trust him with the basketball a ton still, just because I don't think he's a good decision maker with it always. But man, he's shown that he can really break down a defender if he really needs to nowadays. He has a ton of skill, and he's really building on his handle. The passing is still pretty to me, but dude can go get buckets when he really needs to, and so he's gonna have a chance to go get some buckets again this year. They got him for 2 more seasons. Great. We already talked about Jalen Smith, Giddey, Ayo Dosunmu, another Chicago guy, a second-round pick that I think a lot of us kind of just figured he would work out. He just seemed like too smart of a basketball player. And I'm glad he's on the team. What sucks is how many guys are at the same position around him, right? You've got like the Javon Carters, the Kobe Whites, the Giddeys, the Levines, all taking up kind of these guard spots, and it's like, okay, like how much are we getting out of an Ayo Dosunmu, right? Like how worth it is it to have him on this team? And like, look, the answer is yeah, you want to keep developing him and everything, but maybe he's a guy that you flip this year because look, he's not going to get a chance to develop all that great anyway because some of the young talent on this team is at that same spot, and somebody would probably pay a decent penny to have Dosunmu. I don't know. It's just a thought. Javon Carter's on the team. That's the best way to put it. I don't know why he's on the team. Javon Carter's a nice basketball player. He does have a player option at the end of this season. I would assume he's going to probably take it just because the Bulls don't play him, and so no one's going to give him $6.5 million. But Javon Carter could be a rotational piece for a lot of basketball teams, man. He's a good defender. He'll pick people up full court. He's a decent shooter if you actually give him some minutes. So I don't know. I like him. It's just, why do we have so many point guards on the team? I don't know. We talked about Duarte and Buzelis already. Dalen Terry. Most Bulls fans will tell you, can we please play Dalen Terry? We just want to know if he's good or not. And I would tend to agree with that. So Dalen Terry, where'd he come from? Was he Arizona? I think he was Arizona. You got like a 6'6", 6'7" wing who he likes to have the basketball in his hands, right? And he has really good passing vision. Like, this guy really sees the floor like incredibly well. We don't know if he can shoot yet. We don't know how great his handle is yet. He's had moments for the team before, and then others where he looks like a young player, right? And that's totally understandable. He was a mid to late first round pick. That's what you kind of expect out of a guy like this. But he doesn't really get the burn to really know if there's anything there. And I can't tell. I genuinely can't tell if he's actually like a decent NBA wing or not. It's just a weird role for him to be, again, because there's so many other guys in this team that need the ball to be successful. So it's like, okay, his biggest strength you don't really get to see. So I don't know. That's Dalen Terry. Torrey Craig's still on the team. I can't believe he accepted his option and came back. Why? Just go somewhere else and get the veteran minimum. Somebody would have given it to you. We need to trade Torrey Craig to somebody. Somebody wants this wing. Somebody does. Trade him to Memphis or something like that. I don't know. Get a second round pick for him. You really should. And then we got 2 other young wings in Julian Phillips, second round pick, super bouncy. He only played, I think he played less than, or maybe like just above 300 minutes last year, so we really didn't see much of him. But he had points where he had some cool dunks, and he attacked the rim well. Stupid good athlete. That's about it. He didn't really shoot the ball that great. But who did shoot the ball well? Batim? I don't know why I'm not saying it correctly, but you know what? That's a me problem. His contract's not technically guaranteed until, I can't remember if it's the start of the season or like halfway through the season or something, but a guy that they brought on like up from the G League or whatever, and he just shot the ball really well. He actually attacked the hoop decently well at times, like off of guys really trying to close him out as a shooter. So I like Batim. I think he's cool. Let's see if we can find some minutes for him, if we can trade some people or something. I don't know. But nonetheless, that's the roster outlook. So if you guys notice something about what I'm kind of talking about here is there's not like this main focal point player where you're like, that's the future right there. And that's a problem because even with these young guys like Patrick Williams, Buzelis, Kobe White, Josh Giddey maybe having like the potential for the brightest future, like it's not like Josh Giddey's going to be like your number 1 through 3 option. Even Josh Giddey's going to be an incredible just like starter in this league, right? Like a guy that's just very solid at basketball and like can really run your team and make all the others like star pieces work together. At least that's what I envision. I mean, he could prove me wrong and I'd be happy to see it, but there's not that piece in place where you're like, yep, there we go. This is what we build around. And that's a bad place to be in. And that's why we're in a selling point right now. Like, you guys think like teams like the Nets are in a bad place. At least they're like somewhat like picking a direction and everything. This team might just be like okay again, and that's not good. You're not getting a high draft pick. You don't have a bunch of extra picks to even like really go into things with, and you've got some players you're paying a decent amount of money that just don't need to be here, and they're going to be unhappy. So you're not building a good culture or good habits or anything. Gross place to be in. But anyway, let's talk about the depth chart a little bit. So a lot of guards on this team: Kobe White, Dosunmu, Josh Giddey, Lonzo Ball, Javon Carter. You've got plenty of point guards on this team. You have so many of them. Need to unload them, but you have a lot of quality guys. You got Batim here also as just a reserve shooter, which is cool because there's not a ton of natural shooting on this team. I mean, Giddey, no, not necessarily. You hope that it gets better. Lonzo Ball was a good shooter, but we don't know if he can even run really at this point. Javon Carter, at times solid. Kobe White can get hot. Dosunmu, solid. Batim, hopefully a good shooter. We look at the wings. Zach LaVine's a wing now just because you've got so many other guards on the team, but then otherwise you have question mark in Dalen Terry, question mark in Julian Phillips, question mark in Chris Duarte, maybe even a negative question mark there, but not great in that department. Going on to the power forward spot, you got two interesting guys in Patrick Williams and Matas Buzelis. Torrey Craig, who's hopefully a guy that you can just plug in and be a decent vet on the team whenever you need him to. You do need some vets on the team, and so it's good to have guys like that. But more importantly, I do think you should just flip him because who here really is the future, we don't know right now, right? We hope Buzelis, we hope guys like Giddey, or something like that. We're building the all-Caucasian squad. Shout out to the one guy that'll comment on that. You know I love you. And then at center, they're pretty thin. They got Vucevic, who will continue to not really play great defense and has forgotten how to shoot threes, but he's still just a reliable double-double guy. Some teams should want him for that reason. Like, he's not a bad basketball player. He's just maybe not as dynamic as he once was. And then you got Jalen Smith, who's interesting nonetheless. So I wish I had more positive things to say. So here's what we're going to do now. We're going to explore like a trade or two that I think that the Bulls could make. We're doing this in every single video, looking at just like some potential moves because I think it's fun and it's interesting, and potentially ways to help the team. We're not going to reflect it in here because the point is to be a season preview. But anyway, let's jump into it. All right, the first one I want to explore is actually a Nikola Vucevic trade. Look, we all know that the LaVine one makes the most sense to do first. I don't honestly know how they're going to make that deal work at this point. We've all read enough Zach LaVine like theories and stuff like that, so go watch those or something like that. I'm not going to try to trade Zach LaVine here. I do think that there's a logical move to be made, though, between the Bulls and the Memphis Grizzlies. The Memphis Grizzlies clearly need a center. I know a lot of us are like, oh, Zach Edey could be an option, and maybe. He maybe could. But that still leaves one Zach Edey who is a maybe, and then a bunch of question marks, right? So Nikola Vucevic, not that expensive of a basketball player. $20 million, can spread the floor, grabs rebounds, sets good screens, sounds really good next to a Ja Morant. If he could figure out how to shoot again, perfect. Ja Morant's got all the space to work in the world between him and Jaren Jackson. Jaren Jackson's the defender that this team needs anyway. And here's the thing, Vucevic has been a part of good defensive teams. Those Orlando teams, they built really good defenses with him as their starting center, so we know that it can happen. How can we actually make this trade work? I think it obviously starts off with him going there. Brandon Clark becomes the immediate player that you send back. Not really a young player anymore, but at least another center to take back because you'll need some depth at that position. The salary starts to make a little bit of sense there. Who else do we throw in at this point? I'm thinking like a Jake LaRavia because, again, he comes in at that same position as like Buzelis and Patrick Williams, but maybe then you can move Buzelis or Patrick Williams over to the wing because I think we both hope, or we all hope, that those two could more so move to that position anyway. And I like Jake LaRavia. I think we're seeing like he can start to put the ball on the floor a little bit more. Last season, he was really starting to show a couple things. So maybe we do something like this where these two could go over here. What kind of picks do they have? I don't think we're getting a first round pick for Vucevic, by the way, because we're asking them to take on that money. So I think you could honestly do something pretty simple, like just be like, hey, give us this second round pick and then give us like this second round pick or something like that, right? Try this trade. I have to imagine that this works. This is a successful trade. I think this would be a great thing. I would be thrilled about this. You got some draft capital. You got some guys to plug in at center still that could be interesting. And then you got an interesting young player that you can give some minutes to. So I don't know. I think that that's a decent first option. Let's explore another deal. I think that there's a simple trade that could be made here. I know the Bulls don't always like to make these like interdivisional trades, but I think that there's something interesting we can do. We don't need Javon Carter on this team anymore, right? Javon Carter, though, feels like the type of guy that Doc Rivers would really like, and they don't necessarily have a great answer at backup point guard right now. DeLon Wright was solid for the Heat, but we all know that players, once they leave the Heat, don't always play as well, and Javon Carter should in theory be probably a better defender and shooter than DeLon Wright. So I think that there's something here. And look, he's got 2 years left on his deal. The Bucks don't really need a Pat Connaughton anymore. He hasn't been a great shooter in a little bit, and look, they can save a little bit of money by doing this. The Bulls can absorb this and just bring in another shooter, which, look, I think it'd be a good thing to do just because you have a lot of guys that aren't necessarily shooters that you're trying to develop. You need to give guys like Giddey and stuff options. So I think you could do a pretty simple trade like this and have some good things happen. So that's at least one, those are at least a couple trades that I think could be valuable in some sense. But anyway, let's start talking about rotations and stuff like that. I always put a question mark on the rotation here just because, like, we don't know how many minutes guys are going to play at the end of the day. This is just an activity that I would do when I was coaching, where it's like, okay, how many minutes do we kind of want these guys to play in order to like kind of balance things out? Because look, they're going to play more, sometimes they're going to play less. What's kind of our goal? And this is where I settled with things. I think you got to give Giddey and White a lot of minutes. Zach LaVine, just because you should, and you're trying to probably drive up his value. Because here's the thing, if he gets hurt, you're going to lose more games. That's fine. I obviously don't hope, I hope he doesn't get hurt, but like, it's not the biggest deal, but you have to drive up his value again so somebody takes a flyer on him. You just have to. I think that's the way to do it. You give Vucevic and Pat Williams a decent amount of minutes. These are your core. These are your first five, right? So they got to get a decent amount of burn. Ayo Dosunmu, first guy off the bench. I think that makes a ton of sense with no more Caruso or anything. He's just a nice young player that we're trying to build. I think you give Buzelis, though, kind of that seventh man. I mean, why not? You need a lengthier wing on this team, and he can fit that role. And look, you've got to start growing somebody somehow, and I don't necessarily see a guy that's going to play over him anyway. So I think he gets the seventh man nod. Jalen Smith being that next center to kind of round out the 48 minutes here of playing center. I don't think there's a reason to play Jalen Smith and Vucevic together ever, but who knows? Maybe they'll try something. Lonzo Ball's going to get on the court a little bit. Why not, right? If he's healthy, throw him on the court. Let's see what happens, because we all know how much of an impact player he is in the NBA if he is on the court. That's the goal for now. That's me being conservative. Obviously, if he got back to where he was, shit, he might start next to Giddey. I don't know. But Lonzo Ball's a really talented basketball player. Get him on the court somehow. Dalen Terry gets a few minutes. Sorry, Bulls fans. I mean, maybe he plays more than Lonzo, and I don't know. But, like, I haven't seen enough to warrant wanting to play him more anyway, but I think it's interesting, and he's a wing, so throw him out there. Why not? To say the least. It's not pretty, is it? It's really not. Let's take a look at their rotations from last year and see what was working and not working. So these were the Bulls' rotations last year, their five-man combinations at least. So what were the most positive lineups? This one was only like 39 minutes, so it's not all that interesting. The Drummond Vucevic thing, like, don't really buy into that too much. Their best lineup was Kobe White, Dosunmu, DeRozan, Vucevic, Pat Williams without Zach LaVine. Is kind of interesting, right? That was during that stretch where they were like, look, they play better without him, and I'm not surprised that this lineup wasn't bad. There's a lot of dynamicness here, so that's kind of interesting. The rest of the positive lineups, there's a lot of DeMar DeRozan in there, Caruso, who they're just not really there anymore. You do find Patrick Williams in a lot of them, and that is because of his defense, so that's kind of interesting. You definitely try to include him as much as possible in there. You do see some Javon Carter as well, which I'm trying to tell y'all. Play Javon Carter, man. Dude's actually a good basketball player, but he can help out some other team because there's other guys that we're trying to grow at this point. Where did things start to go negative? What were some of the worst lineups that we had? Javon Carter, Torrey Craig, DeRozan, Dosunmu, Drummond. That's just kind of a reserve lineup more so. This is kind of interesting, like a Kobe White, LaVine, DeRozan, Craig, Vucevic. Like that's a potential starting lineup for them some nights, and that just wasn't really working for them. These couple lineups had a bunch of minutes. So who did we have here? Pat, Kobe, LaVine, DeRozan. Yeah, that was just starting five right there. Unfortunately, that's not good. Kobe White, LaVine, DeRozan, Caruso, Vucevic, the starting five, again, just getting killed. Kobe White, Vucevic, Dosunmu, DeRozan, Caruso. They did throw that lineup out there as a starting five at a decent point of time last season. So, yeah, unfortunately, that core just did not work together. The DeRozan-Vucevic combination doesn't work like a ton, and it is what it is. So, what are we kind of taking from this? It does look like Patrick Williams, when he's involved more often than not, is pretty much a positive. So you try to take that away from it. You find Dalen Terry not really in there too much, but this one was kind of interesting. But I don't really know how you replicate this lineup in particular with Drummond, DeRozan, Caruso, Carter. No, I'm not really seeing it. Yeah, and a lot of them were just ones that you could involve Caruso in some capacity. So the team is going to struggle, to say the least. Like, an interesting lineup that I think you could try to throw out there is just try to put as much dynamicness around Giddey as possible. So I'm imagining, like, Josh Giddey, Kobe White, maybe you try to go small and you throw like a Dosunmu out there as well with like Buzelis and Vucevic. Like, I think that could be an interesting lineup. Just a lot of different options for things and for Giddey to create. But I don't know. It's gonna be rough this year. Like, that's the thing. We're not even at a rebuilding point yet. We're still at a teardown phase. We just don't need a lot of these guys on the court. So kind of a gross situation. But let's get on to the predictions. So we have 7 teams on the board right now. Where are the Chicago Bulls going to rank? I think a lot of Bulls fans are hoping that they appear down there. It'd be great if they fell somewhere in here. Where are the Bulls going to fall? Drum roll, please. Oh, make your predictions. Make your predictions. The Bulls, I know. I got them as the 11 seed. Look, you'll obviously see the rest of these at some point, but like, this team's still got dudes that can like win you basketball games, like Josh Giddey and like White and Levine and Vucevic and all of them. And like, they're just, I don't think they're as bad as the teams below them. Like, I don't think they are. So this would be a disaster. That'd be an absolute disaster. Not like, this is where they were last season. Just go down one more. No, were they there or were they 9? I don't remember. But they were like here, and that sucks. So now they're just like a little bit worse than that. And still, like, you keep your draft pick then. Cool. But you're not really going in a certain direction. You got to tear this team down. You have to tear this team down and find some way to do it. Please, somebody new buy the Chicago Bulls. This is just the Bulls fan in me talking. Can somebody new buy the Bulls, please? I just want them to be good again. I miss those times with Rose or Butler. I even miss that team with, like, y'all remember this, like Nate Robinson, Marco Bellinelli, like Kirk Heinrich, and like young Jimmy Butler, Deng Boozer, and like Jakeem and those guys with Taj. They just had heart, and it was fun. This team just makes me sad. But regardless, y'all, that's what I got for the Chicago Bulls this year. But hey, that's this video. We're posting these videos 5 days a week right now. I believe this one's going out on Friday. Yep, so look for the next one on Monday morning. They go up at 7 a.m. Central Time every single day throughout the week, work week or school week, so that you guys always have something to watch. And this will take us up to the start of the regular season, which is really, really exciting for all you basketball sickos out there. You got basketball content to talk about each and every day. So, hey, make sure you guys leave me a comment, leave a like, subscribe, do all those things. We'll talk to you guys later. Thanks so much. Bye.